Thanks for having me, guys. So I'm the senior producer for 360 News at the Times. My background is in theater and music, live performance. I've been a creative director for bands. I've directed live performance events, a lot of like socially engaged artwork. And I ended up at the Times via the New York Times Magazine, was doing kind of large scale video and photo production for them right around the time that they started to do VR a little under 2 years ago. At that point, because of a lot of the work I'd been doing in the music world, I was already working on like art and tech, like storytelling with an innovative tech element. So I kind of just kept asking them to let me work on VR in-house until this project came up, the Daily 360, and so I was the first team member to come downstairs and work on that. So a little bit of the background of VR at the Times. I'm sure you guys have seen this stuff kind of popping up more long form over the last year and a half. But Jake Silverstein, who's a really visionary editor-in-chief of the magazine, was the one who brought VR on. First brought on Jenna Pirog, who was a photo editor at National Geographic, who had worked on stitching in terms of like large photos. So she was working on photos, say, of like an entire redwood. So they were learning how to stitch in that regard. So she had an understanding of the technology. You know, VR welcomes in all stripes and colors. It's sort of, I always find it fascinating, actually, like who's on board and asking what you did before this. One of the first projects we worked on, our VR, like our lead technologist had worked on planetarium storytelling before VR, which kind of made perfect sense. So I produced a piece for the Times about a year and a half ago that was for Great Performers, the Oscars series. That piece was called Take Flight. And it featured like 10 Oscar winners, like literally just like floating through a night sky. So at that point, it was still taking us, 3 months to make every piece and working within really strong limitations. That first piece that we made, Take Flight, the limitation on that was that we had 2 hours with each sort of actor. And in that time, we had to shoot a short film and a photo portrait and a VR piece. So that's why that was sort of a green screen piece, because we had kind of no choice. So that was our first one. And then a couple months after that happened, internally, they started talking about this project that was called 360, 365. So just the idea of making something every day, which honestly I think was hatched before we really understood how that was possible. So they started sort of talking to us about it, sort of recruiting people for it. But we really dove in without having a strong workflow or game plan about how to pull it off, other than knowing that with the new, we use mostly the Samsung Gear cameras, because you can stitch those faster, you can train people on them pretty quickly, and we have about 200 of those cameras in-house. So that's part of the way that this gets done. So our first task in figuring out Daily 360 was to train as many people as we could on the cameras. We knew that we were going to have a lot of material coming in for us to even remotely be able to pull this off. So luckily, the Times has a lot of the best photographers and videographers in the world, and luckily a lot of these new VR kits, if you're talking about a tiny camera and a phone and a monopod, it can fit in somebody's backpack no matter where they're going. So we've trained about 120 people on how to use these cameras, and we try to layer them onto as many existing reporting stories at the Times as we can. Right now, our coverage, we have about 50% of it is tied to existing articles and is really like embedded and integrated into those pieces, and about 50% are standalone. So once we had those, as we've been building up that bed of trained shooters, we've also been sending people to our bureaus around the world to train people. We've been going for about 6 months. We're almost at 200 pieces, and we've shot those in about 32 countries. And the pieces cover all the desks of the Times. So that's really like, when you're talking about a project of this breadth, we really had to tap every desk in the building. So travel, culture, international, national, business, everybody has to be on board for this. And it had to come all the way from the top, because it wasn't something that we could just go around being like, do you want to maybe work with us? This is what it is. Like, it was really like, Dean Baquet, the Sulzbergers, they were like, we want this. We've seen how successful it's been with The Departed and the more long form pieces. So like everybody get on board, which is for us has been such a gift, because even if people weren't familiar with VR or 360 storytelling, they were open to discussing with us and figuring out what they might be able to do. So as we developed relationships with different desks, a couple of projects came up right away, and because there were certain things that 8 months ago we knew would work well and that we could start to work on more easily. So the travel desk was one of the first people that we approached, because we knew that data-wise that people like travel pieces in VR. They like to just go to another place. They like to go to a beautiful place. And also, like, honestly, for our workflow, thinking about working with travel was great because we could work in advance. So they do their schedule 6 weeks out, as opposed to like national or international, where they're like, we have something for you tomorrow. And we're like, do you know how long it takes to stitch a thing? So one of the first pieces that we worked on with the travel desk was 52 Places to Go. I'm sort of halfway through this, but do you guys know this franchise a little bit? They do it every year. They give you 52 places that you might want to go. And so they gave us about 15 of their places to shoot in 360. And we ended up with about a dozen in there. They do this big interactive, and it's mostly photo with short little descriptions. But we were able to fit in this shoot that I invited myself on so that I could go to Prince's house. So I was actually like 100% useless. I did nothing on this shoot except like try to like meet Prince's ghost.
What percentage of pieces are being shot by people that you're sending out to locations, and what percentage are being shot by people that are being trained at various bureaus?
It's sort of the same thing. Of the 120 people that we've trained, most of them are freelancers. So, we've trained a lot of staff. Most of the video department now knows how to shoot 360. All the staff photographers have been trained. Anybody who shoots regularly for the Times is pretty much in the loop and able to be called upon, which is great, because sometimes we'll get a story that comes up and we're like, that would be great for 360, and we'll literally call and be like, do you have your backpack? And they're like, yeah, hold on, I have like an hour more to shoot a photo, then I'll get back in and I'll bring it out. So that's been really vital for us. So this was a fun piece for us just to like get our feet wet and to start to think about what worked for us for ideal composition. It was a great way for us to test out some of our shooters and to let them try stuff. Like this was one of our staff videographers, Margaret Cheatham, who didn't really ask us. We just like sent her to Sedona, and she was like, oh, I went on a hot air balloon. And this is her with her head down there. And so part of it with this beginning was us learning like, what was fun compositionally, but also like what we needed to send out with shooters for them to be successful, and them to be able to like both work with our shot list, but also work on the fly, and to be able to have enough rigging that like they could be reactive to each situation. So I'm not even sure, she didn't even rig this, she's just holding it. Somehow her hat was key in that moment, that we didn't actually, that she's like only partially kind of identifiable. And this was actually really fun for us, because this shot, because it naturally turns, was also like a nice lesson for us in when do you put in a forced pan? Like when do you give like a little bit of gentle movement to start people on that learning curve of how they're gonna navigate this. And as you could tell from this stuff, a lot of, all of our stuff can be watched in headset, but a big push is to get it on desktop, to get it on mobile, to get it really integrated into the life of the Times. That's the whole point of the daily, is that 360 is going to be fully integrated. It doesn't have to feel like this other thing that like if you have a headset, you can engage with 360 storytelling. There's also some like really funny small things in terms of working with a wide variety of visual journalists that come up with stuff like this. So like for this shot in particular, it was like, where do you want to start this shot? And like the designer of this piece who like laid out this page, she was like, oh, I think it should be, wait, I'm trying to remember here where our stitch is. the point that she chose was like right on our stitch line, and we were like, please give us a break. Do you know what I mean? Like, don't highlight like exactly where, you know? So it's like getting that language all throughout the building has been really important. Though I should say we want to work more and more to have pieces like this embedded, as opposed to just having like a little edited piece that goes as a topper. Oh, this was sort of a funny one. This is in the Maldives. This guy who shot this usually shoots like really heavy human rights stuff, so this was like a special treat for him. Yeah. And this was also like sort of, you know, some people liked it, some people didn't. And they were like some people were like, it's really weird that you're like at the table and nobody's there, you know? So these have been like these sort of fun experiments for us in being like, what feels okay and what doesn't.
Navigational device. So when did you decide to include that?
That's a good question. That was from the very beginning that we had that. And there's been a lot of discussion about how much direction you have to give people for them to understand this. Part of like when we once a week we look at 360 and VR that's happening in the field, and part of what we look for is like literally how people are describing it. Are you saying like in 360 video, blah, 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 360 degrees, that, you know, like, is that in your headline? Is that in your summary? Is that in your navigation device? Because people are still a lot looking at these and thinking they're normal videos, you know? Like, it's not everybody, like, understands that you can interact with it. But it's also, like, on this piece in particular, I think, oh, maybe we had, like, this, you can't if you can see it really small, click and drag to see the Matterhorn. So we on this one, instead of just saying click and drag so this gave you a little bit of incentive, like, oh, great, if I move, there's the Matterhorn. So because we had a designer on this one, we were able to make that particular. So
he has a Samsung on his head.
Yes, he does. He does. We do have a downhill skiing one of him, which took a lot to stabilize the like 15 seconds of it, but it was really fun. Yeah. Again, this is like, we're just encouraged. So this is part of the training thing. We're encouraging people just to like really get out there and try stuff. So as we started to work with other desks, oh man, this happened yesterday too. This was one of our earliest pieces that this was Nick Casey and Meredith Cahoot, who are some of our best reporters.
This summer to document a chilling new reality there, treating patients in a country where there were virtually no drugs. This is Margarita. She has schizophrenia and had no medication when we met her. She was being held in solitary confinement since the night before we arrived, when she leapt onto her bunkmate and bit off her nose. The victim, Cleophila, was in another room being consoled by her sister, and the two were still in shock. There's a shortage of medication because of Venezuela's economy. The collapse in oil prices and years of economic mismanagement has meant the country doesn't have the hard currency to import many of the drugs these patients need to live ordinary lives. The El Pampero Hospital is only the start of the problem. Outside these walls, thousands of other patients have been released because their hospitals could not treat them. Here in the nurses' station, a kind of triage is happening. It was a typical day when we arrived. There were some medicines in cabinets, but not enough of them. Now the nurses had to make a difficult decision of which patients would receive their pills and which would not. It was the most stable, who was suffering the most. Emiliana did not receive the medication that she needed. She has suffered from schizophrenia for years and is confined to a wheelchair. She moans throughout the day of our visit. The nurses told us she has little food and no medication for her glaucoma, which they say spread and leaves her barely able to see. She seemed trapped in another world, hardly able to speak to us. We could only make out a few words. I'm not crazy, she said. I'm hungry. Emiliana was eventually taken to her bed, where she continued her pleas. Nurses told us about another Emiliana, years before she came here. When she was young, she was educated, white, and always clean, he said. It was after her husband died years ago that the first signs of schizophrenia appeared. That's when she was brought here to El Pampero by her family.
Okay, I'm just going to pause there. That's like one of our longer pieces. But that was one of the early examples of like when we got a great reporter on board really early and a great photographer who, that was the first time she had shot 360 was for this piece, but she shot a lot. She shot many days in a row. She had relationships with these patients already. They were comfortable with her. And it allowed us to integrate with what we felt was like some really important reporting that was going on in the building, and also allowed us to be taken seriously in the larger context of the times that 360 could cover, in addition to a beautiful shot of the Matterhorn, could give you a unique perspective into a very important issue. And it was also interesting just in terms of how to get that coverage, like particularly that last shot in that very tiny room, being very close to that woman. You know, we ran that shot by our standards editor, like, is this okay? Like, this is where 360, the intimacy of it, that is a real boon to the medium, is actually feels like uncomfortable sometimes, you know, that you're that close to somebody who is suffering in that way. So that was a really interesting piece for us. And honestly, that went out so early that like, it wasn't our normal process of like, let's work on a shot list, let's figure it out. Like we literally just like trained them. I trained them over the phone on the cameras. They went out for 3 days and they brought back, and then we figured out how to edit it together. So training people, working with each of the desks, that was kind of how we started to roll. Basically at this point, we either solicit pitches from each of the desks, or we're going out and sort of nudging them and finding what's in your inventory. Let me look at that story. I think that's a 360. I think that there might be an element to that's 360, and trying to encourage story editors and photo editors to be able to recognize it themselves, so that when they see a story come up, they'll know when to call us and when there's an element that's gonna work for us. Because a big part of what we've been figuring out as we like analyze what we do and what works is the Times does a lot of things really well, and we want to find where we fit in that. So we're not forcing ourselves into a niche that maybe it doesn't make sense for us, but we want to find the places where we can really contribute something to a story that you're not going to get any other way. So some of the other desks that have been really great, the culture desk has been really good to us as well. This is, I'm sure you guys know, Kusama's installations. So this is just like another sort of like a light, fun one that for us was great because it's a seamless environment.
Institute Director of the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden in Washington. We're standing here in Yayoi Kusama's Infinity Mirror work. It's called Fally's Field, and it was created in 1965. It was her very first Infinity Mirror room. Each of the Infinity Mirror rooms in the exhibition differs. The common thread is that you standing inside this very intimate space feel as if there are infinite views of yourself, but also the other elements, and they could be light.
There's our camera.
Illuminated pumpkins, or even lanterns. One of the works is just a very simple streams of light.
Here's our camera.
Create this sense of you being alone in the cosmos.
So pieces like this, the culture pieces, have been really fun to figure out, both for content and for workflow. So for the workflow part of it, when we're making stuff every day, we need to have a lot of evergreen stuff banked. We need to be able to like work a couple of weeks out when possible. So something like this that we know we can anticipate this is coming, we can get there for a normal press day, we can shoot it. Like it's great. The culture, travel, that type of stuff really like holds our curation together, and allows us to do stuff that's more like breaking news. But also just in terms of aesthetics and access, we have really enjoyed culture as 360 for events that are hard to access. For these Kusama things, you get in there for 20 seconds. Like that's literally like and it's like sold out before it even opens. And being the New York Times representing New York culture is a big part of what we try to do. So getting people access to events that they might not otherwise be able to experience. But in terms of the workflow thing, so we try to do breaking news. We try to do it once a week. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. It usually means somebody's going to pull an all-nighter if we're going to be responsive to breaking news. If it's something that's really simple, we can maybe pull it off in like 6 hours. But it depends on how complicated the piece is. And so for those, we try the best that we can to really isolate like what your shot list is going to be, what are you going to give us so that we can plan in advance. But the interesting part about this for us over the last couple of months is that like you really never know what your good shot is going to be. No matter how much you plan it, a lot of it is very surprising in terms of what comes out compositionally, how clean something is, how clear the image is. I mean, also part of the struggle of new technologies is that like the cameras sometimes are like spot on and sometimes are not. You know, of our 200 cameras that we have, like we have ones that sort of like blink out at moments. So we always keep people with 2 cameras because if you're in breaking news, it's just like run and gun, go. And every time we do breaking news, we learn more about it. But we really try to zero in on the breaking news events that will work for 360. So something that really does feel like an environment that you want to look in every direction. And ideally something where you could get either great VO or, you know, one of our very first pieces that we did that did really well was we went outside when the Cubs won the World Series. We were outside of their stadium and our shooter was just in the crowd with the camera over his head with his head down because that was the only way to do it that we could figure out because of course as soon as they won it was like the whole like camera shook and you could just see him like trying to not fall over, you know. So we're always looking for those breaking news events that will help us and that will work for 360. We're also working with opinion a fair amount now. And this was one of our first opinion pieces that we worked on. And this was a great example of where the 360 and the article in the Times were working together kind of hand in hand.
So I go to this special entry gate. I put my card in and opens the gate for me. And it's working. Okay, here we go. For someone who doesn't know New York, I think the first thing I would say is that the subway really is how you get around. And I always was almost proud of that when I have friends come visit. Isn't this amazing? You have this subway that runs all day and all night, and anybody can take it. And then suddenly, after this accident, come to find, no, it doesn't work for a whole segment of people. I'm not trying to fall down Brooklyn Bridge, Atlantic, Woodside, Lex. There's almost 500 stations, and only 1/5 are accessible at all by elevator. And even worse, the stations that do have elevators constantly going in and out of service. So you're never assured when you get on, you're going to be able to get off. Because I wouldn't be going anywhere. I'd be getting back on the train or calling the police to get me out of the station. I've had just good citizens offer to carry me up the stairs. There were these 2 guys, and one of them tried to help me up with one hand while he carried a cup of coffee in his other hand. And this woman saw him doing it and said, "Hey, hold on, let me take your coffee." So the 2 guys held my chair, the woman took the coffee, we got up the stairs, and got his coffee. Not the most encouraging is the light. The light doesn't come on. The elevator is out of service when the elevator light is on.
I'm just going to pause that one there because it's another kind of longer one. But this ended up being a great collaboration because the subject of this piece also wrote an op-ed for the Times. So we made the video first and then approached Opinion and said, like, we think this could be an opinion piece and this guy can write. So he was able to create an article that really complemented the video and that like was a great use of 360 because we were able to rig it right to his chair. So you could see him, you could see what he was seeing, and we've been trying to find those situations where we can do that. And so Opinion has been a nice place for us to in terms of bringing us very personal pieces and us trying to figure out like how our cameras might be able to help show their perspective. I mean, and then also, you know, whenever we so we did this piece, we learned like, oh, it's nice to have something that's close to somebody, you can see them, you could see what they're seeing. And then, you know, we got something from travel that was like a family travel piece, traveling with kids. So then we put the camera really low and had a kid's perspective. We had the camera out with like 10 families on vacation, which was great. And in some ways it was like easier. Actually, I can show you a tiny bit of that one because it's very cute, just for a. Sorry, just take a second.
Don't like that, bud. Because it's really cold, and if it's too cold and you lick it, your tongue will get stuck to it. What? It really hurts to take it off.
I'm just going to pause this for a second because he's holding the 360 camera there. This is David Maurice Smith, who's one of our favorite photographers in Australia, who just happened to be at Whistler the week that we needed him there. And he just figured out, he shot so much for this, he just brought it with him on vacation, but somehow he was able to get it at just the right angle, but we didn't erase the camera in that moment. So that was a really fun experiment for us in just like, what is the simplest application of getting something at somebody's eye level, you know, and really seeing what they can see, and giving it to 10 families who, some of the parents were photojournalists or documentary filmmakers, but some of them were just families who happened to fit in the like 10-day window that we really needed somebody to be on vacation. Because like this piece was produced in like, yeah, in probably like 10 days. So in terms of timing, like it's anywhere from like a couple of hours to a couple of weeks. But you know, when desks approach us, we try to say like, if you can give us a week, then we can get you something like really good. And usually if it's less than that, then it's more like run and gun, get something that feels like good coverage of an event. Yeah, so this is, so that's kind of the range that we're working in. And part of what I think we're trying to learn now is how to deepen the reporting on the pieces. I think that's like the workflow for VR is heavy, and even with the Samsungs, it's a lot. It's a lot of details. It's a lot of production work. So being able to either partner with reporters or make more room to do more reporting ourselves, because right now it's sort of like really lovely little slice of life, but when we can actually, like the Venezuela piece, like partner with reporters to get the images that go hand in hand with that deep reporting, that's really exciting for us. And I think we're just learning how we can break our form. Now, when we started, there wasn't, you know, what is short form VR journalism? Like, it wasn't a thing. So, you know, and at first we thought to pull this off, we were only going to do single shots. We were like, it's 30 seconds, it's one shot, it's like a title, that's it, you know. But then it's like once we actually like got together, we were hungry for more than that, you know. And part of, I think, the ongoing conversation that we've been having with each other and with the photographers and the videographers is, when does this function like a photo? When does it function like a video? And what role can it play somewhere in between? And that is a challenging thing to get everybody on board with. You know, the assumptions about how this functions in a piece, about how people interact with it. It's hard, you know. Some people assume that like, well, if you have to scroll through in the middle of your article, you're going to boot out your reader. They're going to get bored, and it's like, well, like, I don't know about that, you know. Like, so that's been part of our challenge, is figuring out how. Some of the most dynamic visual journalism at the Times is with the design department, when they can take a photo and a video and design and a map and a 360 and make it all fit together with the reporting, so that it's not just this other thing that if you like VR, you'll go see it. So figuring out like really how stuff functions has been an interesting challenge. And we use heat maps a lot. When we post stuff on Facebook, we get a heat map of where people are looking, and if we trigger somebody to say like below you is a bridge, and then we can see the heat map if the eyes go down to look in that place. So that's allowed us to be really responsive and to get better at our editing and to get better at like where we place text and how that text functions. The rhythm of editing with the text in these pieces is challenging, and it's challenging with people like, say, who have been like a doc video editor for 10 years and understand a very clear rhythm of like how to work with text and editing an image, because it's different now, do you know? Because if you edit at the pace of a regular video, you're not allowing people the time to look around, and if you're not allowing them the time to look around, then you might as well just make a regular video, you know?
I was going to ask so about editing.
Mm-hmm.
Because I see video editing. Do you always work with the same editor? Maybe not, and if you do, or not, what have you learned? Because you do it at such a quick pace. What have you learned about editing, not just as in pace, but where you place? Because I've noticed a lot of the good editing that I've noticed there is also, let's say, you keep, there's a little fade out, fade in, but you start with the face of the individual, where the face of the individual was before, so you kind of have a point of focus that will, you don't have to look for the point of focus, what we call the point north.
Mm-hmm.
Is always, kind of similar.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find any tricks? Because that's something that people really don't know how to deal with.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very interesting, whenever we edit, it's a very interesting back and forth, right? Because essentially you're guessing at where the viewer's gaze is going to be and trying to set your next image where you think they'll be, so that you're like, okay, I think they're going to be on that face, so let's try to put this tree right there so that when the next edit comes, that's where you'll be. But even just a producer and an editor looking at a piece are going to have different opinions about that, Like, I need you to recenter that because I don't know where I am in that moment, or, like, how much are we guessing our viewers are engaged with the piece, And that's why the heat maps and stuff help us to know that, like, over the last 6 months, their engagement has slowly increased, so that we don't have to build in force pans as much, and we don't have to use text quite as much to say, like, all around you is whatever, But we still do say sometimes, we've been doing a lot of border pieces, like, borders are a great story place for 360, because you're literally like looking at one thing on one side and one thing on another side, and that also allows us to play with text a bit, to say, like, the text here is Mexico, the text here is Texas, and depending on where you're looking, you're still going to be oriented. But yeah, I mean, we're working with the limitations of like where VR is right in this moment. Like, I'm sure if we're continuing to do this next year and we have more capabilities, that like especially the function of the text and the subtitles will be very different.
So you mentioned in the I guess interactive media group, you may have a map, you may have video, you obviously have text, you may have other photos. How do you and I guess going forward, I don't know if you've resolved this now, but how do you see integrating those pieces together, where it makes sense, where they're not necessarily having to pop out of the video, or I have some ideas about how you might be doing this, but I'm just curious to hear from you guys have started to go down that path.
Yeah, well, I think there's actually. I wish it was. I wish it was already out today. We have a big piece coming out on Thursday that you should keep an eye out for. That's like, it was a really smart designer who is messing with our 360s, and so he gave us a new frame for it. So he gave us a circular frame to work in, which all of a sudden gives it like a whole. And you can still navigate in it the same way that you would navigate in any other piece. But so that way, it's like the square photo and the circular 360. Somehow that felt better to everybody in the building to like have them in that way, because ours are more low res. So that conversation is very interesting, like when resolution is king, like will we ruin your page by putting in like a lower res image? Like that's part of the conversation, and also like being really clear about like how it functions and how much time you're gonna spend in it. People still view that very differently, do you know? Like, I sort of think, like, for something like 52 Places, where you have one image, it's like, yeah, you spend a couple seconds, you, like, kind of dip in, you look around, and then you keep reading, and you keep going. But if there's an edit in it, I mean, that's very interesting, just thinking about, like, okay, you're reading, you see something, it has a cut in it, how much time do you spend in it, and how much time do you go continue reading? It's definitely, we're, like, in the thick of it, figuring out all of that stuff. And I think getting designers, like our digital designers at the Times, who are like just the best and the smartest and like these wonderful, like brilliant people in the building, but getting them on board getting them on board even to make it better. I think that that's part of it. Those certain limitations, like we have one guy in the building who's like, he's like obsessed with like that we shouldn't have to force pan ever. He's like, we should be able to have an app that's responsive to this, so that if somebody is already navigating, that you don't force the pan. That there's like all of these little, like there's so many hacks that could make our app better. But yeah, so we're still learning how it fits. Yeah.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the decisions you guys make about sound, like in-camera sound, separately recorded sound, when to add voiceover, things like that.
We put a zoom in all of our kits, so we encourage our shooters to just strap the zoom to the monopod so that we always have outside audio. We have in certain situations, especially early on, or if it's more like run and gun, we might not have that. But the in-camera audio for the Samsungs is not good. So that's sort of like base level, and that the zooms that we send out do record spatial audio, even though we can't use that in our app right now. But our sort of hope is that like then we'll have it for like when we get it, then we can, and I know in-house we're all like really excited about that. Everybody's like learning how to do that in anticipation of that, and because some of our more long form pieces do play in apps where spatial audio is possible. In terms of VO, it's interesting because it's got to be a great VO for it to work, and you have to be able to pair it with that person on camera in a dynamic way. And when we were first starting, we would get like a great VO, and then you would be like, where is he? Like, where's the person? You know what I mean? Like, you can't like do the close-up to be like, this is the person who you're hearing right now. And you don't always want to hear them on camera, because doing an on-camera interview in 360 is sometimes really awkward. Sometimes not, but sometimes really awkward. So it's been an interesting, VO, when we have good VO, it saves us. We have one of our producers on our team has a radio background, and so when she can make like a really beautiful like radio edit to start for the pieces, we're always in better shape that way. I think that that's a place where we can really continue to improve, though. Yeah. Part of what's been great actually is, the Times now has a new audio division, so we've been like sort of cross-pollinating with them a bit, and they're and it's nice to come from completely different avenues with that. So yeah. So some of the other, sorry, I'm not checking my phone, I have my notes on here. Some of the other challenges, I would say, of this is just figuring out how to, as we get better at it, we start to narrow in on what works and what doesn't. And the pitches from the Times is still like really like across the board. So now it's at first we just said yes to everything. We were like, do you want to shoot? Go get it, And now 6 months in, we're sort of narrowing in on like, right. Thank you for that. We know that doesn't work now, But there's certain things that we're always interested in exploring. Like if a story has an interesting sense of scale, we encourage people to go get it. We had somebody bring us a piece recently that was about tiny wooden beads that were like medieval artistry beads. They're an inch across, but they have like all of this crazy tiny detail artistry in it. So we were able to get a high-res photo of those so that it was like you were inside the bead, so that you could like look around. And it was just a photo. It wasn't actually shot in 360. And that type of stuff for us has been really exciting. Or dealing with scale. Like I wish we'd be able to get access to this, but Damien Hirsch has a bunch of new stuff going on, and his newest sculpture is like 3 stories high. So the photos that we got of it, it's like him and like literally like the foot of this sculpture. That's like a, you know, this like 100-foot tall man sculpture. And for us, I was like, oh, that would have been perfect for us, because then if you could put the camera down, then you can pan all the way up, which is what you would have to do as a viewer there. So so that's one of the areas that, like, if it's anything playing with scale, we encourage people to do that. If it's anything where like it's a really unusual place, even if we don't really know where it's gonna go, we just encourage them to get it, and we'll come back and see what they've got. Yeah, so we're still like kind of in the midst of it. I do have a couple more examples on here that I can show. This one is an excerpt from our Life on Mars series. So this is an ongoing series where we have given cameras to the crew, to a NASA crew who are in a Mars simulation. So they're like stuck in this dome for 8 months, and it's sort of like, how crazy will they go? That's like essentially like what NASA's testing. So we gave them the cameras, and sorry, that was sort of a funny place to start, but.
Going outside is not an option, at least not without a spacesuit. So, feeling the wind rush through your hair, the warmth from the sun on your skin, the smell of wet grass, or even taste of freshly made snow falling from the sky. All those senses are spectacular and so unique, and you lose track of how awesome and vital they are to a person.
The landscape outside the Hab is very barren, just huge lava plains on the side of this massive volcano that we're living on. I mean, it definitely feels like we're far away from civilization here, and it's starting to feel more and more, in a way, familiar and alien at the same time.
Cleaning the toilets is an interesting experience. It is not the most pleasant job, but it has to be done, and we rotate it through the crew to make it a little bit more fair.
So I wanted to show this clip for a couple of reasons. One, because they're like our perfect 360 test captives, right? Because they have our cameras now and they have a lot of time on their hands. And so we went and shot the first chapter of this and trained them how to use the cameras. And now they just send us dispatches every couple of weeks, and then we edit those together. So that guy putting the camera into his little red plant experiment, that was just like him on his own. That wasn't like our shot list. That was just them shooting enough that they're getting the hang of it and getting the feel for it. And the same thing, we just email them questions and they record themselves on the interviews, or they interview each other. So that's been a great way for us to sort of serialize or have something that you can watch over time, and a great naturally 360 environment, you know. So it's interesting though, because something like that where we'll do a critique every time we get this type of footage in, like even like them in those crazy spacesuits collecting dirt, it's like, was that the best place to put the camera? Like, should we have put it like right in the middle of them? Or should it have been farther away? Like, what compositionally are we looking for each time? And how do you want to frame things each time? And teaching people that is a big part of the struggle, I think, you know? And we're still learning that ourselves, so yeah.
Very tiny detail. Do you color correct?
We do, within like kind of the Times standards.
I've seen some, especially even with the Samsung, sometimes the colors are better than with the other cameras. And sometimes one camera will not do exactly the same kind of lighting or brightness than the other, so you have two.
Totally. Well, and we have the templates that we use for stitching. We have a template for every camera that we use that's slightly different for the stitching and for color and stuff like that, because we know that each of our cameras functions in a different way. So we track like, oh, this came from camera 56, so use this template, and then that way it'll be easier. So we have like one sort of like girl wonder on our team who's like just like a whiz at like figuring out all of the crazy templates. And I shouldn't say girl wonder, woman wonder. She's like a full-grown woman. But at figuring out those shortcuts and stuff like that have been so valuable for us. And we've been able to get faster because of stuff like that. But that's really like the more time we have, the more we can make sure that we can like touch and refine color and make our audio really smooth and everything like that. But it's interesting to find editors who can deal with 360 and have a full capacity for like narrative and color and stitching and all of those things, you know. So we do lean on like our wider video department to come in on certain things, and especially something like color. Yeah.
Fake Love, is that part of your
Fake Love was acquired or by the
Oh, which piece was Fake Love? Was that NYTVR piece?
I'm not sure if it's a piece, so it's a production company, but they do a lot of AR and VR, and there was some news at some point that they were acquired by the New York Times.
New York Times acquires marketing agency Fake Love.
I don't think that, I mean, we don't work with them for VR stuff. Maybe it's another portion of what.
So there's Daily 360, and then there's other groups that are doing other things too?
Well, I mean, it's really like NYTVR is like the entire thing, and so like, and 360 News is kind of like the, you know, the umbrella for us, and the Daily 360 is a part of that, but the NYTVR long form pieces, the stuff that comes out of our graphics department, so something like our Pluto piece, which was like all done graphically, we did an Olympics piece that was all graphics. So there's a range, and it's sort of been slowly consolidating. It's sort of like it takes a lot of people to get it done, but then also in some ways we're very small. So, you know, yeah.
How do you all communicate in this 3D world? Like, how do you share ideas like if you want to talk about something, do you sort of if you're in a room, like this is here and this is here, like how do you do your storyboarding, prototyping?
Yeah, totally. It's a little bit different every time. Like if we're gonna add an intense graphic layer, then we'll do a full storyboard and we'll usually do it like an equirectangular, you know, so if you're putting something in space, so you make it so that you can print it out so you can see, you know, so when we're editing, we always edit so that you have to move through as you go, you know, so that you're scrolling. We edit in Premiere and so that you can actively scroll through your window. But if we're storyboarding, we do it equirec. And a lot of times we'll do stuff in equirec just to like make sure that we're not missing something. Because sometimes if you're scrolling around as you edit, like, I mean, we did a tiny real estate piece recently where like I didn't realize until like our 5th edit that there was a dog in it, you know, because he was like very still and small on the side, you know. But looking at it in equirec, it was like, oh, right, okay, like don't miss those details, you know. So, yeah, I mean, it's not that different than normal storyboarding. It just takes a lot more wiggling when you're trying to edit it out to make sure that the orientation is what you want it to be. That's most of what I have. I mean, I certainly, you know, we have 200 pieces. I could definitely point you towards some other ones depending on particular interests and stuff. But that was most of what I brought.
So in terms of developments ahead, audio right now is fairly flat. Is this just a function of like new, easy to use, deploy technologies, or Is it a principle?
No, I mean, I think it's like we really want spatial audio. Like I think that's like, I think that's on our wish list. It's definitely not like I think it's just like the fact that the Times has embraced this in the way that they have and have got a 360 player that goes all over the site. I mean, I think that that's been sort of miraculous into itself, and that we have enough support to do that. So it's kind of communicate in the same way that we've been educating the building about like this type of storytelling. It's the same thing educating the building and the programmers and the decision makers in terms of like what we value and what's gonna, kick it up a notch. So like spatial audio, sticky subtitles, stuff like that, that it's like release us from the confines of the app, and when you increase the app, you increase what we can do with our stories. Yeah. So I think it's just the baby steps of what we can get done in our app. Yeah.
And I'm going to ask a question I asked last night, but just because it's a different group, but it's the ethics issue. Like so there are, of course, a lot of ethics involved in thinking about the image, still image and moving image, and you're part of that world, but there probably are other affordances. You mentioned the proximity to the patient. Are there things that you see as really distinctive to the VR domain in terms of journalistic ethics that are maybe a little different than what a photographer might think about or a videographer?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely like permissions because everybody's in the frame and everything's in the frame, So like there.
How does that work? Like because there's a lot of crowd stuff.
Yeah, I mean, and with the crowd stuff, it's like if you're in public, it's the same thing as like what a photographer would do. Like if you're at a rally, then there's an assumption that pictures will be taken, but it is an interesting thing because also a photographer is very recognizable as a photographer, and our cameras are unmanned. So, and people don't recognize what the technology is yet all the time. So there's an interesting kind of dance in terms of like, do people know that they're being filmed in this moment if they don't recognize this to be a camera because there's no like body behind it? So that's been something that we've been navigating kind of as we go, and that we're very, very particular about and try to keep a really open dialogue about and not assume that our rules are the same as the photo department or the video department or the regular video department. So it really is still story to story. And Phil Corbett, our ethics, our standards guy, is really fantastic about like being open-minded about it. Yeah.
And there's no residue of the verite moment where, that notion that you should see the shooter. I mean, if the shooter's in the shot, that's not a bad thing. It's actually an honest thing. There's obviously no residue.
We had one piece recently that did really well about black fans of K-pop. And it was somebody from our video department who filmed it, and it was her first time, and it wasn't like totally on purpose, but she's in a bunch of the shots, and she's just going like, hey guys, can you do this now? And then she like kind of runs out, but we ended up, when we were editing it, we had her do a VO that says like, hey, that's me. Like, and she's a black woman, and she's a fan of K-pop, so it was like an interesting way into the story. And the piece was light, it had a sense of humor, and so that presence of the shooter made more sense. And in the same thing, like the longer form, like Ben Solomon did the Fight for Fallujah piece, and like clearly safety was an issue in that, so he's in all of those shots because you're not gonna like hide behind a rock in a war zone, like you have to like sort of stay present. Even though like Ben is not the type of guy, do you know what I mean? Like you can see him like sort of being angry that he's on camera. Like, he doesn't wanna be in the spotlight in that way. So we do kind of navigate it piece to piece. I think sometimes you can be there, or even like we just saw Sam Green, the filmmaker Sam Green, he just did a really lovely piece on Buckminster Fuller's domes. And he does all this nice stuff where he like holds up a sign to the 360 camera that has like an old archival Buckminster Fuller clip. And he has like a sound guy following him around for most of it, so you just like see the guy with the boom, and somehow, because it's his style and it's Buckminster Fuller, like it's okay, like it kind of like makes sense, even though you can tell that it was sort of like a funny solution to it. But I mean, I think they're all worthy experiments right now, I think that's what we're really trying to avoid, is being like, these are the hard and fast rules. Because like literally like every 3 weeks, we're like, oh wow, we thought that was a rule, but we just broke it and it worked. And so like, let's figure it out, yeah.
So I know this isn't exactly VR, because you talk about using the tablet, the computer screen, and it's 360, but it sort of veers into that space. It can be used that way. And everywhere you see VR, whether it's associations or financial reports, it's always VR/AR. Any
I mean,
Motions and
we are
videos.
as excited about AR, I think, as as everybody else in the VR world, and I think it's just a question of of access and resources, and I think the Times has been excited enough about this medium that we will continue to see it evolve, and certainly for all of the makers that we're engaging, part of what we do is show people what's happening and make sure that people follow the trends in the industry and in storytelling so that when that moment comes for our organization, that we'll be ready for it. I mean, I don't have there's no secrets that I'm keeping in terms of that, except that we're excited about it in the same way. And even going to Sundance this year, and I was scouting a bunch of pieces just so that for my own self, and getting to do AR stuff is wonderful, yeah.
Are you noticing any long tail on your archive? Are people going back to stuff you've done? Are they reading it? Are they looking at it in the day, or are you seeing sort of once people stumble upon it, do they go back through what you have?
Both. Yeah, both. We have a very weird, our data analytics people meet with us once a week, and they're always wow. It's a whole different thing, in terms of how people interact with it and when it pops up. And in the same way that a Times article will pop up a couple months later because it's relevant in a different way. And we try to keep an eye on if we published a piece 3 weeks ago, but now next week there's another article that's relevant to it, we'll embed it again and try to make that, or we'll re-edit it if the footage is now relevant in a new way and the story has developed in a new way. Yeah.
Because what we saw with interactives at the Guardian, we didn't get the Times data, but the Guardian was fairly open, and that stuff just kind of grew. People would sort of stumble into that world and then start checking it out, even if there wasn't a news connection.
Yeah, and even our playlist now, and we have curated playlists is nice, and people will just the pieces are so short that people roll through a few of them at once, so yeah.
But I like the approach too, that you're understanding sometimes we're conflating medium and organization. So if it's this is the new medium for news, or it's the new medium for filmmaking, or it's a new medium for game. But if it's a new medium, it can be part of, let's say you're not abandoning photography, you're not abandoning writing,
No.
and you have a 360. So even the AR question and dilemma, I'm pretty sure they could coexist. Because
Yes.
people go back to consume content. AR is really about adding into your world, so that should be completely different content because you have to look at things around you while you're using that template. So I'm pretty sure you're going to have a solid base of fans who will go just to consume content, which is very different. What I mean by consumption is just to get information or inspirations that are not necessarily based by looking at around their own world and adding a layer of reality on that reality.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty sure they will coexist. I'm really curious.
Yeah, well, and that's that's why we're so excited about being a part of visual journalism in general at the Times. It's we have such deep respect for the photographers and the videographers and the designers that are already in the building, and just figuring out a way that all fits together, that it can all coexist, that we're not trying to co-opt or take the place of anything. We're trying to carve out our own niche in that world.
That might be a mistake that some news. So I'm working sometimes as a consultant for CBC in Canada, and they're having a hard time figuring it out because it becomes a competition between departments instead of a collaboration where one does not mean the other doesn't exist, or one does not mean that you don't need your photographers anymore. It's kind of just rethinking the way you present content to your public.
Yeah, and I mean, and the interesting part about this, right, is that as a VR editor, as a 360 editor at the Times, you have to be able to be a photo editor, a video editor, a story editor, and I think that's what some of our colleagues are a little we're covering all of that, in our pieces, and so we have to learn about what everybody's doing, and we have to have very diverse teams to pull that off. So it's kind of nice with new initiatives like this too, because every team has seasoned in the mud journalists, and then people who are great storytellers, and then people who are great technologists, and we're all learning from each other, and it has to infuse the building with new energy, Yeah. Did you have a?
Yeah, I'm really interested. You said that you meet with the data people once a week. Have they found what different types of content people like at different points in the day? Like, are people reading, like, doing the travel pieces at night versus in the morning? Have you looked at any of those patterns, and what type of content gets the most interaction?
I'm going to answer this like sort of vaguely because I can't like divulge like exact, you know, but like that's something that we're interested in and continue to figure out, and that I think the Times has better data about it in terms of articles than they do about videos. You know, so that's something that and even if, you could probably track that yourself if you look at when we post our Facebook, our pieces on Facebook, do you know? This is like a new thing, so we're figuring out like when people want to look at stuff, and when, you know, I mean, like, there's all these things that come with working at a newspaper where you're like, if it's in the morning briefing, if it's in the evening briefing, if it's tied to an article, if it's on its own, if it's something that's super newsy that people are searching. So like, in addition to just like making the pieces, like we get trained in like how to best write a URL so that it's very searchable, like how to best write a headline and a summary so that like if it's a news event and people are searching for it, that like the words that we're putting in there are relevant. So it's like, that is, you know, like I was saying last night, I was like, the stamina of doing this is like a big part of it, is like a big part of what are the challenges, but also like the stamina of the Times period is, you know what I mean? And all of the stuff that all of the story editors and photo editors already do there, in addition to just like making BR every day, like that's our challenge, is keeping up on like how do we keep it as sharp as all of the articles are and still try to like move this medium forward. Yeah. Yeah, but that's like, we're all like, if we weren't data nerds before this, we definitely are now, you know? Yeah, yeah.
I was wondering about also, you mentioned, you know, the interest in socially engaged or the community, but also I was wondering how this comes, I might have missed it at the beginning. You mentioned the 120 people that they were, so what I was wondering is that like, some of them are, you know, photojournalists or journalists. Like, how much of that is like community members, or are you guys initiating to kind of like give this tool, you know, if there is a news, like the tool would be in the hand of like people that they are like on the ground actually there, or in a more of a sort of collaboration. I was curious about like any of that.
Yeah, well, even like we just did a piece that was like a quick turnaround on like the Arkansas death penalty rallies that were happening, and so the shooter that we sent down there, he did some interviews, but then also there was like a group of people that were delivering a petition to the governor, and so there was like 5 of them that had these boxes full of signatures, and then he just gave the camera to one of the activists, and so she walked it in, so that there was like, it's not as much like, hey, we're gonna train you, like go for it, like you have, you know, like with no journalism experience, but in terms of collaborating and being like, I'm gonna leave this here, we're gonna work together to figure this out. Or even we just did a piece on, there's a series called This Week in Hate, where it's like an event where someone was discriminated against that week, and then they write about it. And so we had a young woman who was harassed on the subway, and so she did sort of like a selfie stick kind of thing where she walked down the subway and said like, last Friday I was on the subway and this was happening, and da-da-da-da. And then she put it down and then just like stood, and then we went into like VO. So in that way, we collaborated with her very closely to tell her own story, similar to the subway piece. But I think because of the journalistic ethics at the Times and how strong those rules are, that the situations where we give it to a non-journalist are generally only on like a lighter story. So like the family vacation thing, like, yeah, we did give the camera to a 7-year-old, and like they did great, you know, but like, oh yeah, do you want to, should that be, that maybe should be like our closing piece on this, if I can find it really quick, let's see.
The 120, all of them are journalists?
Journalists or 360 shooters that like you can bring, you know what I mean? Like, or like seasoned storytellers who, because I've only been at the Times for, you know, a year and a half, and I was not a journalist before that, you know? So like, I think that there is like a bit of a melding, but if you need somebody to like really run and gun and get something, then like you have to be able to trust that they're gonna not like set up a shot and call action, you know, because we're a newspaper, like it's you know, so there has to be kind of, so I wouldn't say it's like all journalists, but, because there's definitely 360 shooters who come to us with great story ideas, and then instead of briefing them on 360, we brief them on like journalistic ethics, you know.
Hey, and out of curiosity, so what was the tipping point in terms of interest across the desks in the organization? Okay, you get buy-in from the top, that helps people be interested. But I know with interactive, it took a while. Like Snowfall seemed to like wake people up. It's like, oh, maybe my story could fit. So
it's still,
it went from
it's
push to-
ongoing. Yeah, it's ongoing. And I think with each desk, they have their own tipping point. When like we did a piece for the culture desk that was like a day in the life of a ballerina and at the New York City Ballet, and that went over really well. And they had pitched the idea very smartly. Our shooter got great footage. The ballet community is like rabid on the internet, so like everybody watched it, you know? And for that, and then all of a sudden we started getting more from culture because they understood how well that could work. And it's been different for each desk convincing them, and some were like immediately like, we don't know, but like try it, like go for it, you know what I mean? Like, and also because certain desks get more visual attention than others, you know? Like
Certain what,
desks, so like, you know, the science desk, the culture desk, the travel desk, yeah.
So do you go to them most of the time to pitch an idea?
But both ways, definitely both ways, yeah, yeah.
And that's what I was asking, what's the tipping point from you banging on their door every week to them coming and saying, hey, have we got something for you?
Most desks are coming to us now too, because they know that we're like pretty responsive and that we can add an interesting element. And also they know that like if it doesn't work, we'll say no, but we'll say like keep coming, like keep giving us more. And because like we'll train your reporters, like you don't have to be a photographer or videographer. Like we have some of our best stuff. Oh, actually, I can show you a little bit. Is it? Let me see if I can. Well, wait. We don't have much time, so I'm just going to show you this one actually, because this is super ridiculous. So this was like actually like a very legit shoot about animal trafficking that sort of went a little off the rails.
Oh, wow.
This is the best use of VR.
This must be astounding with goggles on.
It is. So eventually after, oh, well, I think that text actually comes up. You could hear the shooter saying, don't eat it, don't eat it. So yeah, that was.
That's great.
That's so great. So, so that idea was a journalist's idea, and the journalist came to you and said, "This is what I'd like to do," and you're like, "Okay, we have Sam can shoot this for you," or how
Sam was like, I have a story about an animal. Sam was like, I have a story about an animal sanctuary. I mean, this is definitely an outtake. We definitely did not plan to have him steal the camera, you know? And in truth, the larger story of it got scrapped because it was tied to an article that just like didn't end up coming out. So, you know, yeah. But often when we're sending people out, if we send them for a story, we have what we call a scavenger hunt. And so we'll say like, if we're going to send you somewhere for a story, like, could you also get like traditional music? Could you also get like, what does laundry look like in this area? What is a picnic in this area? What's a local market? Because there is no archive for us. We don't have Getty Images where we can like pull a pickup image. So we're always trying to like build a bed of archival stuff that then sometimes like this will just grow into a little nugget of a piece on its own.
Do you do that for sound when you're going to the field, just so that you can build up a soundtrack if you have a part of dialogue that's not?
Sometimes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm just
Yeah.
thinking of like how to do the audio design.
Yeah. Yeah.
You need lots of extra wild sound and atmospheric sound and room tone.
Yeah, and it depends on the specialty of our shooters, do you know? And that's.
Say no.
how much they know, yeah, and sometimes when we send out like 2 people instead of 1, that's when we end up getting really great audio because somebody's only on audio and somebody's only on visual. Because honestly, like getting the 360 and a still image, because we need a still for our cover image, and the great audio, like getting all of those things, it's a very special person that can do all of those things well. But that's what we've been learning in the last like 2 months or so. We've been sending out more people that are like just doing audio for us. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thanks guys.